Hey, I'm gonna show you guys how I created my recent documentary. Let's do this. The most recent documentary I created was for the Florida Climate Institute, and it was a lot of fun, but though there was a lot of limitations because I had to put so much information only in 2 minutes. It was a documentary style that I allowed the interviews to drive the story forward. I kind of had a feeling of what I wanted to go for. I wanted to talk a little bit about how in order to find a solution, we have to agree on a problem, which was fantastic because every person I interviewed had that goal in mind. Before I went in, I emailed everyone and I allowed myself 30 minutes for each interview, which is kind of tricky because that only allows me 15 minutes to set up and 15 minutes for the interview. So what I did, and I find this very crucial for every filmmaker to do, is I arrived around 20 to 15 minutes early and I started pre-lighting. I started getting all the lights up on stands. I got the camera ready so that way I can just move the camera in, kind of warm up the talent a little bit, start talking to them, make them feel comfortable that they have such a big camera in front of them, and then progress with the questions. It's very crucial for us as filmmakers to arrive early. Never arrive late. It's unprofessional. And when you arrive early, you allow yourself to get a better feel for the location. It drives your nerves down, so it helps us relax, get a feel for our environment, not be in a rush, because when you're in a rush, things start to get ill. So when it comes to the questions, I made sure I emailed everyone before. I gave everyone almost a week notice before I showed up. I gave them all the questions before. They were very broad, and then I started honing it down as I heard them interview. So as they spoke, I took little notes down and I started progressing the story forward. And those were the moments I used inside the documentary instead of the pre-made questions I have. When it comes to lighting, I only use 3 lights. And no, I didn't use a 3-point lighting setup. Instead, I used one big fill light where I had a huge soft boxes coming into the face, a nice kicker, a nice rim light on the side, and then a backlight to light the environment. As my main fill light, I used the LS1. It was fantastic because I had a nice soft source that would cover a nice broad area. Since I only have one light, I'm not putting it at a 45-degree angle. I'm shifting it a little forward to cover more of the face and get the separation that I really wanted. When it came to the background and rim light, I used my aperture Amarans, a nice little kicker in the back to help them separate from the background. If not, they would have gone washed out. And you can actually see right here in this interview where I had no kicker, just a fill and a nice soft light coming in as natural light coming in and a nice bounce covering it. But you can see here there's no real separation in the background because there's no kicker and there's no real shallow depth of field. Now when it comes to my lens selection, all my interviews were done using the 18 to 35 Sigma at a 1.8 aperture to help create that nice soft separation. When you're doing interviews, you want to create separation, but you don't want to go too crazy. You don't want to go too telephoto with your lens selection because when you do, you kind of start separating the subject between the camera and the audience, and that kind of creates this awkward situation that you really don't want to go down. Notice when you're framing your subjects, you want to use the rule of thirds. So you have to use your grid system which you have in your camera. You want to make sure your subject's eye is either connecting to the top left corner or the top right corner. And this allows you to also put lower thirds in your subject. The brilliant thing about this, if you're shooting 4K, it allows you to punch in without any real hesitation. When it comes to my audio setups, I actually don't own any lavalier mics. I tend to usually rent them or have them on set in production, but I just use my Rode Video Mic Pro as a scratch audio and then my Zoom H5 as my main audio. What I did was I put it as close as I can to the subject and just have them kind of talk into it. Since they weren't talking directly to the camera, I put myself onto the side and had my microphone right in front of me, so they're talking directly into the microphone. Now, be very wary when you're using audio, and if this is your subject and this is your audio channels, make sure you're not really pointing directly at them. It's a little weird. So what you want to do is you want to go down a little bit or go up. It helps create that nice crisp audio. You always want to try to get as close as you can to the subject and try to eliminate as much room noise as you can. My biggest mistakes of this piece is I didn't get as much B-roll as I wanted to. I should have gotten more laboratory setups, more scientific elements in the B-roll, though we were very much in a rush. I didn't want to bother the scientists as much as I did. And when it came down to the editing bay, I was just really sad I didn't have those components to drive the story forward, but the B-roll still worked anyways. Another big mistake I made was with the outside setup. It was so windy. I didn't bring any C-stands, so when I tried to use a natural bounce, it just kept blowing away. I just used an aperture Amaran to put some light on his face. It was very harsh. He got really squinty. It was just a super hard setup because at one point people started coming into the background. The audio was everywhere. So much wind was coming around, so every time he said something really neat, I had him say it a couple of times so I can manipulate the audio and the video for it. You gotta still see this light in his glasses, which was such a big mistake I made. I should have gone up and down. This light was not powerful enough to counteract track the sun. The LS1 is, however, but all my batteries are dead. Did location scout the area to make sure I had power. When I went to go test out the power that day, we had no power. It was right after the hurricane, so I was kind of screwed in that department. I hope you guys learned from my process of creating this documentary, and if you have any questions, or even if you have your own documentary coming up and you have some questions you want to ask me, feel free to do so in the comments down below. Don't forget, I make videos every Monday and Wednesday. Kiss, kiss.